Welcome to our session, New Men, New Women, New Cities. And I'm honored to introduce an amazing panel that will discuss some of the future challenges that we have in cities and how women are at the forefront of leading innovation to address these challenges. And we have an amazing panel that has been at the forefront of city developments around the world. And we will discuss today what kind of leadership we need for cities, what have been personal experiences of the panelists we have with us today, and how can we foster and support this kind of leadership to drive innovation, resilience, and sustainability in our cities, but also what are the barriers to really implement the kind of leadership that we hope to see for the future of our cities. And that's why I'm very excited to introduce today Susan Pettifer. She's the Director of People, Performance and Technology of the City of Sydney. Amalia Zepou, the former Vice Mayor of Athens and the founder of a citizen engagement platform called Synathena. And ElsaMarie D'Silva, the founder and CEO of the BMW Foundation based in India. Welcome today. I'm really looking forward to host this discussion and discuss with you and hear from you how we want to develop our cities and what you have been doing in your work. And without further ado, I would want to introduce you with a few questions and then ask you to share some of your first thoughts before we enter into a hopefully lively discussion. So, Amalia, you have been a documentary filmmaker, the Vice Mayor of Athens, and the founder of a digital platform. Throughout these different roles, what have been some of your key drivers and objectives that guided your work?
Well, it started about 10 years ago when Athens and Greece were going through a very difficult moment of financial crisis and political crisis and moral crisis in the country. It was a moment where I put the camera on the side, really. At the time, I was still making documentaries and wanted to participate in this spontaneous activity of community groups in Athens just to take care of the city. This is how it all started. Thank you very much for inviting me today. I just wanted to say that, and I'm really, really happy and honored to be sitting here with those marvelous co-panelists that I've been meeting thanks to the festival. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for having us, and thank you for kicking us off. So the next amazing woman in our panel today is Elsa. So Elsa, as the founder and executive director of the Red Dot Foundation, you focus specifically on improving safety, especially for women in large cities around the world. What brought you to this topic, and how has your work started to define your definition of leadership?
Thank you, Helen, and thank you for having me here. So I started on this journey in December 2012 when a young woman, Jyoti Singh, was gang raped on a bus in Delhi. I'm sure you may have heard about that horrific incident because it made global news. But within the country as well, it shocked everyone, and it shocked a lot of women. And for the first time in my social circles, I had friends opening up about their own experiences of sexual violence in public spaces and also at home or at the workplace. And I myself was triggered and remembered all the various incidents that I had experienced but had subconsciously filed at the back of my mind. Now, at the time, I was an aviation professional with almost 20 years between two of India's largest airlines. And I decided that this incident was important enough for me to make a career switch and find my purpose. And since then, I've been working actively on safe and inclusive cities for women through Safe City, which is our crowd map where anyone can anonymously share their stories. And that data is open source for people to use it at their individual level, but also to engage their communities and work with authorities on institutional accountability and governance.
Great, thanks so much. So, Susan, welcome to you as well. Under your lead as the Director of People, Performance and Technology in the city of Sydney, the city in 2019 won a prestigious award for the Best Workplace Diversity and Inclusion Program. Why did you make diversity such a key part of your priorities and in this role? And how did you drive the changes that are necessary to achieve such an amazing result?
Thank you. Yeah, we were very pleased to receive this Top Australian Award, a national award. Look, the City of Sydney has a really strong commitment to the principles of social justice. And so it's really a core part of our DNA, I would say, as an organisation. Why we focused on it, diversity and inclusion, and I'll focus on gender for this panel, is because we know that it's the right thing to do, it's the fair thing to do, but we also know that gender balanced or gender equal organisations and leadership teams produce better results, both in terms of performance and in innovation. And so we've really been focused on women in the pipeline in leadership and management, who gets promoted, what opportunities, development opportunities people get. We're also really proud of our pay equity results. So in Australia, if we look at the average wage for men and the average wage for women, men get paid 14% more than women. It's not unusual globally. But at the City of Sydney, women get paid 7% more than men. So it's a 21% difference. They get paid more because we have more women in senior positions. So that just shows our commitment to women in leadership and management. But it's really been a multi-strategy approach, and we can talk more about that as we talk about gender and leadership.
Great, thanks so much. So lots of experience, lots of ideas and expertise that we already got an idea about. What's striking to me is that you all started to share also very personal starting points, why you put a certain priority around women in cities, and why you started your work, why you founded certain initiatives. I would really like to hear how this personal background and personal experience has then shaped your work and also shaped how you see yourself as a leader today. Elsa, can you start answering that question?
I thank you, first of all, for this wonderful question, because many people don't realize women's mobility actually impacts their access to opportunities. So, for example, why did I choose to focus on safety of women and inclusive and safe cities is because for most of my life, I worked in the travel industry in aviation. And here I was traveling all over the world for leisure, for work, and never having to worry about, would I have to be accompanied by somebody, or would I need permission? So I was an independent, strong executive. But when I looked around, a lot of my friends did not really have that ability. And mainly it was because they were constrained by socio-cultural norms that did not allow them as women to maybe take a solo trip or plan a holiday without another person, especially a man around, and so on and so forth. And that, to me, started actually put me on this journey of questioning why is it that women are always dependent on people around them. And therefore, I believe very firmly that safety of women, especially in public spaces, is critical to their financial independence. Their ability to get a higher education, their ability to get a career. We heard earlier from Susan that in Sydney, women in leadership positions earn a lot of money, more than their male counterparts probably, taking the average higher than other cities. But that is only possible when women have that full freedom to express themselves and explore the opportunities around them. To give you an example, when I was in aviation, most of the networking happened after office hours. Now, if you're rushing home to take care of the kids, or if your family does not allow you to be in a public space or outside the home when it gets dark, you are really limiting your opportunities. So, therefore, in a circular way, I started questioning all these things, but ended up working on the root cause, which is these gender norms and stereotypes that limit women and perpetrate some of this violence that then again limits them and their mobility. So I hope I've made sense, but I'm trying to, help you think about, sexual violence in a broader way.
Yeah, and I think it's especially interesting to see this journey from a personal starting point to then addressing very systemic issues of inequality and injustice. Amalia, does this also resonate with you and your journey, that you came from a very personal place and then took it to something that now impacts a lot of people around you and in your city?
Yeah, that's right. This question, to turn it personal, is very triggering. I like it. Charles was pushing me at the interview to have personal answers. So I'll tell you my personal answer. So as I said previously, I started a platform for civil society for the city of Athens, where all activities would be collected and public-spirited citizens would be connected, and those invisible individuals that were keeping their neighborhoods alive in the middle of one of the hardest financial crises would be seen and heard by the authorities. So this platform is called Sinathina. It became part of the municipality since 2013 until now. Now, the hidden reason behind that was that at the time I was imagining this platform, my marriage was collapsing. So I think reflecting on it, because of this panel, reflecting on it, I think that during a very difficult personal time, when I was realizing how dysfunctional my family had become, I really found consolation, like it was a reflex, right? Dreaming about a microcosm, of true transparency, of diversity, of real collaboration between different members of society, and of a place where marginal voices would be heard. This is what the platform was about. Greece is a very patriarchal society, and women organizations talk of Greece as, of sexism in Greece like a drug. So despite this incredibly top-down mentality that I'm sure, a lot of us share here, the Sinathina platform achieved a whole range of tools that made cooperation, diversity, integration possible, right? And it made it possible not in the core of public administration, on the periphery, on the side, but it was as if this new way of governing got a foot through the door, let's say, of the heavy-duty administration. So I don't want to make it a cliche, men versus women dichotomy, but I think that even though it might be politically incorrect to say so, it is in the women's world or the female man that we attribute the skills of moderation, collaboration, flexibility, and humility that are necessary today, right? I was reading the Leipzig Charter, a draft of the new Leipzig Charter and the Urban Agenda, who talk about multi-level governance and societal transformation. So we desperately need new governance models that will mobilize the collective intelligence of their citizens and the ability to share resources, to share power. Otherwise, it doesn't seem we're going to make it, right? So that's it. So it is in those attributes that are considered to be the weak, let's say, part of the dichotomy, that we find the strength. I think the weak are stronger than the strong these days.
Thank you, Amalia. And I think we all really appreciate the personal approach, because I think, yeah, change starts with people that then leverage their potential and those of others. And so, Susan, you have already achieved quite amazing results with putting so many women in leadership positions, so where they have the power to make decisions and to influence the people they work with and also their city. How would you say has this started to change the city of Sydney, but also the women who are in those positions?
Yeah, very interesting question. I think when you have a mass, a critical mass of any previous minority group, it does change the dynamic. So I pick up on the previous comment. I don't think it's necessarily men versus women, but it is this this diversity, this critical mass of diversity, which changes the dynamic in organisations and around leadership tables, and then that produces something different. I think that's what we've learned. We also, I think, more women do challenge the sort of dominant leadership model of, either a dominant, usually a man, or this idea of this sort of overly charismatic leader at the top. And I think it's more likely in gender equal teams that you get a more participatory style of leadership. And I think participation and empowering others has to be part of the way that cities run, going to the earlier point, because we need really all hands on deck if we're going to solve complex problems. That means men and women. We've got to harness 100% of the talent that's really available. We can't afford to keep some of the talent hidden from solving these complex issues that cities are facing.
Absolutely. And can you share maybe one specific example where you could see that this kind of more diverse leadership and more diverse decision making has really made a difference to what's happening in the city?
Yeah, I would say in our work in probably climate action, we're very committed to action on climate change. We're very lucky we have a female Lord Mayor and a female CEO, and we have more than 50% of our councillors are also female. And I think that has meant that they have connected very broadly and resonated very well with the community on climate change, and really brought it down to connections with, for example, mental health. We have a real issue with heat in Australia and urban heat islands. And so this whole idea of, and you would have seen on the news, the whole bushfires and the smoke was, in Sydney was worse. The air quality was worse than in some parts of China, which is unheard of in Australia. It was a real shock to us. And I think our female leadership has really connected those issues with what it's like on the ground for families, for children, for people, older people, for people with disabilities, for people who can't afford to run air conditioning all the time. I think it's resonated differently because we've had female leadership.
Right. Elsa, Susan just shared how it makes a difference once you have a critical mass of women in leadership positions. I guess when you started your work, there was not such a critical mass, but you had to really be at the forefront of such woman. You define yourself today as a leader, and what were some of the leadership experiences that shaped you and your leadership style through, I'm sure, a number of challenges, but also successes?
During my time in aviation, of course, I was one of very few women leaders. Aviation has a lot of women on the front lines, but very few in leadership positions. And you only have to look at the number of airline CEOs who are women. I think there are less than 3 or so. Anyway, when I was in corporate, what I found was that women, or rather my style, was very collaborative, looking out for my team. So going beyond policies and trying to make that ecosystem of support for each of them. And also questioning why all the CVs were male, which HR then turned around and told me there's no other head of department that has put in such a request, because I said I'm not going to close the position till you find me women candidates. Of course, I will always choose on merit, but I need to have a fair selection process. So anyway, so from there, but also mentorship. When I was in corporate, I had some great male bosses, which comes to the point that, it's not about men versus women. It's about diversity in thought. And we just need more women at the table. And how can you do that? It's through mentorship, which I've carried on in my work as well. So now that I'm in the social sector, I spend a lot of time mentoring younger women or women who've taken a career break, or for that matter, even young men, to think a little differently, a little broader in their approach. And the idea is that if you create that ecosystem of support, everybody will find their own path and they will be able to feel confident in in their own leadership style. And that is very important, because there's no one leadership style. Even if you look at today, during COVID, the countries that have done well are mainly headed by women, but they have all different leadership styles. So one woman or one woman leader and many women leaders are not necessarily going to have one style. But unless we see them, we cannot be them. So we have to have more role models. And in my work at Safe City and Red Dot Foundation, that's what we are trying to do. Amplify women's stories, amplify women's voices, and put forward a lot more women, just like you're doing on this panel, so that it's not the only few women that get all the opportunities, but a broader number of women that come to the forefront, and then people can decide, who they like or who they don't like, or what attributes they like, etc.
Lot.
Can I just add to that? Yeah, it's just really interesting what you just said, about, what country governments, are doing well during COVID. We looked to some of the females. There's a study just published in Australia recently about companies in capital cities and how they're faring during COVID-19. And they found that gender equal leadership teams, organisations that had fairly balanced gender leadership teams, were performing much better than others, both in terms of the care and support that they were providing, and secondly, the ability to pivot, during this time. And then they looked at whether the company was had a female CEO or a male CEO, and they found that companies that had a female CEO did better on one key measure, and that was the ability to innovate, which I think is really interesting for cities, because, of course, innovation and creative thinking is, going to be critical to get through some of these challenges. So I think COVID is expanding, the range of leadership examples we've got to look at.
Absolutely. And Amalia, does this also resonate with you and your experience, that these kind of platforms where more voices are heard and make a difference drive innovation?
Exactly. I loved your example. I'd love to read actually this study that you just referred to, because the question is, have those cities that developed platforms like the one in Athens, have they done better? It's a question that I'm trying to answer myself, and I've had difficulty finding the way to answer it, although you give me some good hints there. In Athens, for example, we had a problem, a lot of abandoned buildings. One of them, an old market, at some point had the municipality had neither the capacity nor the funds to manage it. And so it was a very difficult moment. The municipality couldn't find a way to manage, govern, and run the empty and abandoned public market. It was very difficult for the city council to digest an answer of like the following one: let's do it together. Let's pull resources, or any resources and skills that people want to give for this. It was a very difficult answer. It was a very difficult question for this patriarchal mentality, let's say, that we all share in Greek society. And it took, we managed it, we did it finally, to pull the community, private funding, European funds, anything that the city could give to it. But it did take 3 years of very meticulous, transparent proof and evidence that everything was done in a way towards a good result. The suspicion of the surrounding was huge, and I think it does highlight a little bit those, the different way of governing of women versus the old traditional one that we've been referring to.
Yeah.
So the idea, when women lead, they express their emotions most of the time. And often, at least I was accused of being very emotional when I was in corporate and made to feel like it was a weakness. Till I had a mentor who actually told me that it's just part of your feminine nature, and most women leaders are more expressive in their emotion than men. And during a time of crisis like the one that we are talking about, that ability to care, that ability to express emotion just makes you more human. And you also have seen it, where Jacinda Ardern did a Facebook Live in her pajamas, which was so resonant with everybody else. But also Angela Merkel, who apologized to the German people that we have to suspend some of your freedoms, which, gives you that assurance that there is some thought put into it. It may not always turn out to be the right decision, but often, the ability to express emotion helps you connect with people.
Yeah, I think that's a key point that Amalia made, but also about that the process matters, right? So that when you bring these different people and perspectives together in a diverse space, that it takes more time, and it takes more convincing, and it takes a really different approach to decision making. But the question that I would like to put to Susan around this is, would you also see that the result then makes a difference in a different way than if you just take a decision, the one man at the table, the kind of traditional approach, when you really also design a diverse process to get to a new solution?
Absolutely, definitely. I think the experience is if you front load, your decision making, if you're involving lots of people in viewing the problem or the challenges, sourcing the opportunity, getting different perspectives, then when it comes to implementation or delivery, you don't really have to work that hard to get people on board, because they already see it as their idea. They've already moved along in the co-creation. So I think people who are able to work in this, whatever we want to call it, participatory, empowering, co-creation way, it's a natural advantage to leading others because they're already coming with you. They've already bought in. So, you know, the implementation is so much more effective. The development might take longer, but the implementation, I think, will be quicker and it will stick longer. You know, it will have more stickability in terms of ongoing outcomes.
Yes, thank you. But I would assume, let me know if I'm wrong, that this was not easy to convince kind of previous leaders that this is the right approach, because it's such a different approach than what we're all used to. I mean, also us sitting here, we were taught that process is to be led in a very different way, and that it's decision making and quick and efficient, and then implementation just has to be kind of done no matter what others say. So how do you convince the relevant actors to test and experiment with these new approaches? And I think both Susan and Amalia, but also Elsa, that's I think a key question, how we bring that to other cities, to other organizations, and also encourage others to really try and go down that road.
I would say one thing is that, in a sense, the disruption that we're all experiencing at the moment, whether, you know, for us in Sydney, it's the sort of twin challenges of obviously the pandemic, but also of climate change. No one person has all the answers, you know, and I think everybody's very clear about that. And I think in a way, because there isn't a right answer, it does force people to move away from this very dominant linear mode, you know, where there's a direction, I've got all the answers, and if you just do as I say, we'll be all right. So I think in some ways the failure of that style of leadership, because it's insufficient to deal with the current complexities we're dealing with, does create an opportunity to experiment, because it can't be worse than the other, if you know what I mean. Yeah. So it's like embracing, it's like, you know, it's embracing the opportunity that we've got to say, well, this failed, how about we give this a go?
Is this also
Can I jump in?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. It's necessity. It's not ideological. The choice is not ideological. It is a necessity that brings you there. Athens and Greece, that has gone through this crisis, turned to social innovation without really knowing it. It was just more practical. It brought results. At the moment, like the example with a building, there was no other way. I mean, my question in the city council was, okay, if we don't do it by using the input of the community and our social capital, is there another way, you know, that you propose? And with no budget and no capacity in the municipality, there was no answer. So it was the only, so one has to use these windows of opportunity, and now we are going through one, I think, where it shows how more practical and direct this collective, let's say, mode of governing is. You don't really need to persuade. It's just the only way somehow.
Elsa, do you agree?
Yes, absolutely. You have to use the opportunities that are presented to you. So, for example, in my work on sexual violence, most women and girls, not only in my country, but around the world, don't really speak up and talk about their experiences. And therefore, we use simple technology where they could anonymously share their stories. Now, that in itself creates a new data set, which has never been made available. During COVID-19, for example, everybody's talking about the spikes in domestic violence. But again, in my country, you can't really make out the extent of the domestic violence simply because there's no data available. So why is it so hard for authorities to make it simpler for women and girls to report? Why do we have to go to the police station or put ourselves at risk, or, you know, call up an authority figure we don't trust? So my point is, use what is available to you in innovative ways, make it simpler. but also be inclusive in your methods. Because again, for example, just because it's not your lived experience or there is not enough data, the services are not available. So in this situation during COVID, where women are experiencing domestic violence, there are shelter homes that are not accepting women. There's lack of mobility because transport is not working, e-passes are not easily available, procedures are not clear, and of course, low trust with the police. You don't build trust in a crisis and in a pandemic. All that has to be done earlier. I believe that with more leadership that is diverse, you would think about all these things more deeply. You would innovate easily. You would take a little more risk than following the normal path, in creating systems that work for everybody. And all these problems are much, much bigger than all of us put together. Not one of us can solve it. So we need that buy-in that, Susan was talking about, where we co-create together. But to co-create together, you need the information, you need the awareness, you need that trust. And that has to be built as well.
Yeah. All of you mentioned the impact of COVID-19 on your initiatives, on your cities, on some sort of new ways of doing things. And it's really fascinating to see that there's already studies on how leadership and diverse leadership has affected how we've been dealing with the pandemic. So there is kind of a window of opportunity that you all mentioned. At the same time, at least in the country where I live, in Germany, when COVID-19 hit, all of a sudden it was almost only men, experts, advisors, panels who kind of explained to us the pandemic, who advised the government. And it was almost like we were thrown back to kind of the old patriarchal days. And I felt, okay, in a crisis, we do refer back to kind of what we've been taught and back to the kind of control and patriarchal approach of solving things. So I think it's a very ambivalent situation to be in. So from your experience, what do you think, how can we now going forward really leverage the potential that we've seen and the signs of movement and innovation, and don't turn to this default crisis solving mode that is, I think, very deeply rooted in a lot of us personally, but also as societies. And I'll just ask Amalia to share her thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's very difficult. I think the key word Susan said, she said the word complexity, right? We might have seen what you just described during COVID, that there was suddenly the national government took the lead from local authorities and cities. But the complexity of the situation is so vast, and the problems that we have created in the past decades are so serious that I don't think that anyone really believes that you can solve the entire, the image is so big that you cannot do it on your own, what Elsa said. It's impossible. There is no one know-it-all illusion any longer that is possible. Sometimes you have to take, the scientific, for example, information was very important to be heard clearly on television by one that would tell you, put your masks, lock yourself down. That's good. That, we need to be able to digest that too. But but it's not one thing. It is hundreds of small activities behind it that have to work in order to support this.
And Susan and Elsa, what do you think?
So Helen, my point is that if we see all male panels, and this was not only in Germany, in India too, on TV suddenly you saw all men, like as though there were no women experts available. I think all of us, it's our responsibility to call out this sexism. It's everyday sexism. where you are being shut out, your voices are not being heard simply because you're not being given the opportunity. Now, why are you not being given the opportunity? Most organizers take the easy way out. They'll call up the ones who are available. During COVID-19 in my country, women were doing triple jobs, I would say. Work from home, work for home, and work at home, because you were taking care of the children, doing the domestic care work, and looking after the sick and the elderly. And even before COVID, the McKinsey study says that Indian women did 5.5 hours daily on an average more work than their male counterparts, at home. This is unpaid work, but no longer can we afford to call it unpaid work, or leave it only to the women to do it, because we are in a situation where work from home is going to be a reality for at least another 1 year or so. Women are getting burnt out. They can't take on any other responsibility like speak on panels or even take 5 minutes off for their own meditation, because there's just so much of responsibility. So we have to call it out, and we have to address the unconscious bias. And until we do that, I don't think it's going to translate into equal opportunity anywhere.
Well said.
Susan, would you like to comment on this?
Oh, I just agree with what's been said, really. I mean, we've talked about the opportunities for different styles of leadership, but we also know in times of crisis and disruption that the gains made in terms of equity can go backwards very quickly. It's like a game of snakes and ladders. It takes many years to make change, going up the steps of the ladder. But in a crisis, I agree with you, Helen, we can slip back very quickly, many years to what we've known before. So we have to be really vigilant about that, I think. We have to take the opportunities really, really seriously and move in that direction. But we also have to protect, the gains that have been made. And make sure that things like remote working and working from home doesn't lead to this, double or triple disadvantage, as Elsa said.
So what I've done, Helen, is during this time, I've mobilized my German networks of the BMW Foundation Responsible Leader and Bosch Alumni, the Global Diplomacy Lab, and the GIZ Learning Academy. And I made a call out. I said, all feminists in this network, it doesn't have to be women only, all feminists, let us form the Gender Alliance and let's work to accelerate equality. And the response has been tremendous. It's been quite exciting. And I do believe that, whilst on one hand, COVID-19 is making, quite a few women vulnerable and we are slipping backwards on several fronts. But if we form coalitions of support, and it doesn't only have to be within your country, it can be global, you can lean on each other, you can share resources, you can share knowledge, you can share toolkits so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. I can learn from Susan in Sydney how they have reached that position of strength, and so on and so forth. And that way we uplift each other, but we are constantly also providing emotional support from afar and helping this agenda of gender equality to be top priority. We cannot, it's constant work. It's always constant work to make sure that we don't slip.
Yes.
Can I just, add to that? I love that comment that you said, calling all feminists. And you made a distinction, between women that included men and women, because I think that's, the title of this session is New Women, New Men. That men who want to work in these different ways are our allies and partners. Yeah, and we actually, I know it's in the promo, but we actually wrote a book with that. A title, New Women, New Men, New Economy, and we really believe that as well. That the new men don't want to work in some of these patriarchal, styles anymore either. It doesn't suit them.
Yeah, very fascinating discussion, and I think it's a great kind of comment before into our final round, because I think what I would like to ask as a final question, and you mentioned it, you both mentioned the BMW Foundation, and today's session is part of their Rise Cities program, where they focus on resilience, intelligence, sustainability, and equality. And so from the discussion that we just had, how do we ensure we bring those allies along? How do we ensure that we enable and leverage the coalition building that we all experienced and leveraged in our professional and personal space to really make it stick? So what are we going to need as persons, but also as part of this coalition and movement to really make this a new paradigm of the decades? Amalia, I'm going to ask you to start our final statement round.
I think, well, I have two things to say in this. One is we mustn't do it in a polemic way. We have to embrace the old way into a new, make collectively a new way of resolving things. We mustn't do it polemically, and it is in those skills of moderation, understanding, listening, and some humility that you find that aspect. The other thing I wanted to say is that now I'm in Greece, right? At the moment there are hundreds, thousands of refugees which are in the streets again because of what is happening in the... And I was thinking, what kind of society are we going to be? The way we are going to integrate, host or not host, or help or not help, is a mirror for ourselves. And, I would really, really like, I think it is in these conversations, this support of each other, women, or the women way, for both women and men, that is the answer for a type of society we want to be proud of. I'd like to see ourselves going through that type of process for the hosting or the helping and integrating those lost populations.
Susan, what would you say? How do we drive this home?
Yeah, look, I think it is through the coalition building, the partnerships that you talked about. I think it's working through the existing institutions that exist. City of Sydney is a part of the C40, a coalition of cities, and recently I've been involved in the Women for Climate program, which is part of that C40 initiative, and that's been really it's been great to be part of that and to lead a year's initiative in that. And I think it's through using what's available to us, but bringing this gendered lens to it, and bringing this inclusive perspective to all of those institutions, and coalitions that we work with.
Thank you. Elsa?
For me, it's putting gender on the agenda in as many ways as possible. So I believe it starts with you as a person. Look at your own family. Is it gender equal in your own family? The way you're bringing up your children, the way you treat each other. And then look at the institution that you're part of. Do they have the policies that actually promote equality? Do you have diversity in leadership? Do you have wage gaps, or do you have equal pay? So on and so forth. And the minute you start questioning, then you will never accept when you see a panel on TV that has all men. You will definitely write in or call up and say, what's going on? Where are the women? You have to question, and that can only happen through awareness, education, and challenging that unconscious bias. And I know the phrase, the new normal, has been used a lot during this time, but we have to make it such that patriarchy is looked down upon. And it won't take much time. Think about it. 20 years ago, smoking in public spaces was pretty normal. But now it's frowned upon and people know better. So we can make that. We can make that abnormal, and we can decide what our new normal should be. Thank you.
Thank you for ending us off with such a great call to action. And I think it also really sums up the flow of the discussion today, that really went from the personal level to an organizational and institutional level, and how that then impacts our societies. And I think that's really the challenge we're up against, but also the opportunity that we have. Especially, but also in spite of the crisis our cities and our societies go through. And I think we had such a diverse and rich range of ideas here, how we can then happen and how we can basically start today. So I hope there's a lot of inspiration and innovation for others from this panel. And I thank the three panelists for being here today, for showing up and for sharing their personal stories, but also the great examples of how things have started to change in their cities and in their societies. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Bye.